For more on the story, let's go to Duncan Wood in Washington, D.C. He's the director of the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute and is a specialist on North American politics. Welcome to Money Talks, Duncan. Now, for a long time, the Trump administration had been criticised for its lukewarm response to this outbreak. A lot of people had said that Donald Trump was simply downplaying the severity of this pandemic. But what's the response to the president now? He seems to be fronting the media more, urging for Americans to react more decisively against it. Do you think he's taking it more seriously now?
I think we've seen quite a radical change, to be honest with you, in the approach from the president. Just watching the press conference that was held in the White House this afternoon, I think we can see that they recognize that this is an extraordinarily grave situation. They have refrained thus far from imposing major restrictions on the daily lives of Americans, but they recognize that Americans need to take their destiny into their own hands. And I think what we're seeing now is even a recognition on the part of the administration, and President Trump said this at one point during the press conference, that they had had some, let's say, failures in their communications with the media on this issue. So I think that we're seeing a change in attitude. But of course, the United States is a federal country, which means that it's not just the federal government which matters. We're seeing an extraordinary response as well from state governors, from city mayors, and of course from communities across the country as well as businesses. And so we're about to move into a much more severe phase of this crisis in the next week or so, as we see the numbers of infections going up. And I think what most people here in Washington are preparing for is a prolonged shutdown of business, of the working environment, and of social relations.
Yes, and with that prolonged shutdown of businesses and whole economies, I guess comes the greater risk of a recession in the world's biggest economy. We saw Donald Trump in that press conference really devote a lot of his time to reassuring Americans that they'll look at huge stimulus measures to protect the economy from this pandemic. Tell us a bit more about what Donald Trump had to say in that regard.
Yeah, so I mean, the big news, of course, today is about the sort of $850 billion rescue package that the president is proposing. We've already had $80 billion being injected into the economy that has been approved by Congress. The president is contemplating sort of direct emergency payments being made to ordinary Americans who find themselves without work. This is a recognition that we have a dual shock to the U.S. economy, both a supply and a demand side shock. And let me just emphasize that as we see that Chinese growth has ground to a halt because of coronavirus, if we see that happening in the United States, then of course that has global implications. For the past 3 years, the world economy has been driven forward by growth in both China and the US. It looks as though both of those motors of growth are going to stop this year.
We also know that Donald Trump in the past has taken great pride in the fact that Wall Street had been hitting record highs. It's now hitting new record lows. But on top of that, industries such as the airline industry could face bankruptcy in the wake of this pandemic. We're hearing possibilities of perhaps a federal government bailout for some airlines, something Donald Trump hasn't ruled out. He's really singing from a different hymn book, isn't he? It's they're policies that aren't typically your Republican policies. Do you think this is the right message that Donald Trump should be trumpeting right now?
I think absolutely. I think that it's what we're seeing from governments around the world. I think that we are seeing here in the United States that the impact of this crisis is not just going to be short term. There's going to be enormous economic dislocation. And of course, that matters a great deal in an election year. The president is not just thinking about the election, of course. He's also thinking about the good of the country. But obviously, this has electoral implications. And as you said, the president has made a very big deal over the past 3 years about the stock market hitting record highs. All of those gains are now lost. We're in negative territory. And that's not just important for stockbrokers and high finance. Of course, it matters for the average American in terms of what's in their pension. And so as we head into a period only 6 months before, 8 months before the election. All of these are concerns on a political and economic level.
Okay, Duncan Wood from the Wilson Centre in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for your analysis.